The starship Inquisitive Drift floated in Earth's orbit, cloaked and quietly scanning the vibrant blue planet below. Chief Observer Lore Tack, a seasoned researcher, stood at the command console, his many eyes blinking in disbelief. The readings on his screen were almost too strange to process. Ensign Bricks, he called, voice tinged with astonishment, confirmed these findings. Are humans truly still using fossil fuels? Fresh out of the academy and eager to impress, Bricks floated over, antennae twitching with excitement as he examined the data. Oh yes, Chief. Fossil fuels, chemical rockets, and look at this. He brought up a holographic display, zooming in on the chaotic cluster of satellites, debris, and defunct rockets orbiting the planet. They've filled their own orbit with junk, and they still haven't even colonized their moon. They went there once, planted a flag, and then just left. Lortak let out a resonant, multitonal sigh. Utterly primitive, he murmured, shaking his head. Barely a Category 3 civilization. I doubt they'll pose any meaningful interest to the Galactic Assembly. Still. A glint of curiosity sparked in one of his secondary eyes as he scrolled through some of humanity's cultural data. Perhaps we should give them a simple test, he said, an idea forming. Just a little. Survival trial. Let's see how they fare with the wilderness. Bricks's face brightened with anticipation. A test, he asked, mandibles clicking in amusement. I'll prepare the parameters, Chief. This should be entertaining. The Inquisitive Drift hummed to life, its sensors focusing on Earth, preparing to select a few lucky humans for an experience they wouldn't soon forget. Bricks's curiosity led him into the database of human preparedness materials as he read up on Earth's inhabitants' amusing survival habits. He was perplexed but intrigued by a concept they referred to as a bug-out bag. The idea, it seemed, was to keep an emergency kit ready, stuffed with supplies like fire starters, water purifiers, dehydrated food, and oddly basic medical supplies. It was as though humans anticipated disaster at every turn. Chief, you have to see this, Bricks called, barely containing his amusement as he projected a holographic list of standard human bug-out bag items. It's absurd. They actually carry around things like flint for fire starting, purification tablets for water, and dehydrated food. Lortak drifted over, glancing at the floating list with an incredulous expression. Flint and water tablets? Are they preparing for their infrastructure to suddenly vanish? He gave a deep, rumbling laugh. In my entire career, I have never seen a Category 3 species take such extreme measures for survival. It's as if they're expecting their civilization to collapse at any moment. Bricks's mandibles clicked with barely restrained amusement. They've even turned it into a whole industry, Chief. They sell these survival kits to one another, all in preparation for what they call the worst-case scenario. Imagine species with so little advancement that they walk around with tiny kits of food and fire supplies, expecting disaster. Lortak shook his head, laughter resonating through his thoracic chambers. Primitive doesn't even begin to describe it. But I suppose, he added thoughtfully, there's a scientific opportunity here. We could evaluate their adaptability in a controlled setting, see how they fare in a wilderness environment with only these so-called bug-out bags. Bricks perked up, all four eyes widening. A simulated environment, Chief. You're proposing we put them through a survival test? His bioluminescent spots flickered in excitement. I can calibrate a safe but challenging simulation right here in the observation chamber. We'll observe how they adapt or, well, don't adapt. Yes, Lortak nodded, an amused glint in his third eye. Find 3 test subjects, each with one of these survival kits. Will put them in a controlled wilderness environment. Observe how they handle real conditions with their quaint supplies. Bricks gleefully pulled up a database of humans likely to be carrying such kits, analyzing them for variety. Let's see. We'll want diversity for the best data. Here's one, a human they call Helen Cho, a corporate type who's probably never even camped. Then we have Aaron Mendez, a so-called survival influencer, someone who teaches others these primitive skills, mostly through their visual data sharing networks. And finally, Jay Patel, a former military medic with actual survival training. That should give us a good spread. Perfect, Lortak replied, rubbing his upper appendages together in anticipation. Let's make sure each one has their bug-out bag, transport them to the simulated wilderness and watch. If they manage to make it past the first day, I'll be impressed. Brix nodded eagerly, configuring the environment. It's all prepared, Chief. I've even programmed in a range of conditions: cold fronts, limited water sources, and low food availability. If they're as primitive as we believe, they'll likely abandon the trial before the second day. With the parameters set and subjects identified, the inquisitive drift began its experiment, selecting 3 humans for what would be an unforgettable camping trip. The aliens leaned in, awaiting what they assumed would be a display of awkward fumbling, hoping their curiosity would yield an entertaining lesson in earthly survival. With the parameters set and subjects identified, the inquisitive drift crew prepared to teleport the 3 chosen humans into their controlled environment. Let's begin with Helen Cho. Brix suggested, bringing up her profile on the holographic screen. She's an executive at some corporate entity. From what we've gathered, she's accustomed to working in climate-controlled offices and has likely never set foot in a wilderness, much less slept under the stars. Lortak gave a satisfied hum. An ideal first subject. Her reactions will give us excellent data on how the inexperienced adapt or don't adapt in such conditions. A quick activation of the transporter, and Helen was swiftly and silently removed from her luxury office, deposited in a simulated clearing with nothing but her bug-out bag. She stirred slightly, still unconscious from the transport, her neatly pressed blazer and high heels looking hilariously out of place amid the dense forest simulation. Next, Brix continued. We have Aaron Mendez, who calls himself a survival influencer. Brix chuckled, noting the irony. He's well known among his peers for giving survival tips online, yet records indicate he's never faced a true survival situation. His experience is mostly theoretical. Lortak's mandibles clicked with amusement. Perfect. Let's see how his carefully curated knowledge translates when faced with actual challenges. The crew activated the transporter, bringing Aaron from his studio, where he was in the middle of filming yet another instructional video. Clad in a tactical vest adorned with various gadgets and a bandana, he appeared as though he'd just stepped out of an action-adventure catalog. Now lying on the forest floor next to Helen, his bug-out bag neatly beside him, he looked just as unprepared as she did. Finally, Brix said, scrolling to the last profile, Jay Patel. She's a retired military medic with real-world experience in hostile environments. If anyone can handle this scenario with calm and efficiency, it's her. Lortak raised a brow. Ah, a true test subject. She'll likely respond with skill, but it will be interesting to see how she handles the unpredictable behavior of her teammates. With a swift command, the transporter engaged once more, lifting Jay from a quiet forest where she'd been leading a weekend hiking group. Her gear was noticeably more practical than the others. She wore a well-worn backpack, sturdy boots, and had a knife at her side. The crew watched as she landed in the simulated environment and instinctively checked her surroundings, even in an unconscious state. All 3 subjects are now in place, Brix confirmed, running through the setup one final time. The simulated environment stretched before them, a vast expanse of dense forest, a narrow stream, and basic resources spread across the area. It was crafted to mimic Earth's wilderness closely, but with carefully controlled variables the crew could manipulate as the experiment progressed. Activate the wake-up sequence, Lortak instructed, an eager glint in his secondary eyes. Let's observe how they react to their new surroundings. Brix nodded and tapped a command, initiating a gentle hum across the clearing that would stir the humans from their brief transport-induced slumber. As Helen, Aaron, and Jay began to wake, confusion clear on their faces, the crew on the inquisitive drift settled in, anticipation thick in the air. What we're about to witness, Lortak said with a smirk, is humanity's first true test in the wilderness. Let's see just how far they get with their so-called survival skills. Down in the simulated forest, the 3 humans began to stir. Helen Cho was the first to open her eyes, blinking at the unfamiliar sight of trees towering above her. She reached for her phone instinctively, its comforting glow a reassurance that all was right with the world. but her face fell as soon as she tapped the screen. Dead. No signal, no notifications, no way to call for help. Oh no, this has to be some sort of elaborate company retreat, she muttered, brushing dirt off her blazer and glancing around. She spotted the bag beside her, the bug-out bag her company had jokingly gifted as a team-building exercise. She grimaced, mentally running through her schedule and wondering who would handle her meetings if she couldn't. Beside her, Aaron Mendez opened his eyes, blinking as he took in his surroundings. Wait, where am I? He looked around frantically for his camera, his fingers automatically checking his tactical vest, hoping to record what was going on. But there was no camera, no audience, only the trees and the faint sound of a stream nearby. He let out a defeated sigh. Great. So much for content. Jay Patel was the last to wake. Years of military training kicked in as she immediately took stock of her surroundings, sitting up slowly and scanning the forest with a calm but alert expression. She felt the familiar weight of her bug-out bag by her side, a welcome reassurance in this unfamiliar setting. She noticed Helen's fidgeting and Aaron's confusion and took a mental note. She'd seen this before. People thrown into survival situations without preparation often struggled at first. Up in the observation deck, Brix let out a small chuckle. This won't last long, he said, noting the humans' initial disorientation. They're barely even aware of where they are. The executive seems completely lost, and the vlogger is already bemoaning the lack of his camera. Let's see how long they last before they panic. Lortak watched closely, eyes narrowed. Give them a few minutes. Initial shock is expected, but let's see if they manage to achieve anything resembling functionality. Back on the ground, Helen took a deep breath, trying to get a grip. She scanned her surroundings, then glanced at the others, feeling a surge of irritation as Aaron poked at his vest uselessly. All right, she said in a tone she usually reserved for team meetings. I don't know what's going on, but we should start by taking inventory. She kneeled down, opening her bug-out bag and arranging items neatly in front of her. This isn't that different from organizing a project. We just need to make sure everything is in order. Aaron looked at her, bewildered, but as she laid out the contents: water purifier, fire starter, emergency blanket, he found himself mirroring her actions, laying out his own supplies. Yeah, sure, he muttered. Inventory. Right. Jay watched them with a small nod of approval. She began examining her surroundings, noting the proximity of the stream. We're going to need water, so I'll set up filtration by the stream, she said, holding up her purification tablets. Helen, keep organizing supplies. Aaron, start gathering wood. I'll handle the camp setup. Aaron blinked. Gather wood? You mean? Like sticks. Yes, sticks. And don't come back until you have enough for a fire, Jay replied, suppressing a smirk. We'll need it if we're going to keep warm tonight. With a determined nod, Aaron set off to gather wood, mumbling about how this isn't exactly what I had in mind, but gradually getting into the task. He returned with a few sticks, awkwardly piling them in a small clearing. He struck the fire starter clumsily, frowning as he tried to remember what he'd read in all those survival books and online forums. Up in the observation deck, Brix chittered with amusement. Look at him. The survival influencer is struggling to even light a fire. This is priceless. But after a few more awkward attempts, Aaron managed to produce a spark that caught on the dry leaves. His face lit up with pride as a small flame flickered to life, a sign of success in this strange situation. He looked over at Helen and Jay with a grin, feeling a surge of confidence. I did it. Fire. Jay, meanwhile, had already set up a simple filtration system by the stream, placing the purification tablets in a container to ensure they'd have drinkable water soon. She made a mental note of additional resources around them, mentally mapping the area. Helen, back in the camp, had organized the supplies into 3 neat piles, categorizing everything by function: food, shelter, and tools. She adjusted her blazer, wiping a bit of dirt off, and looked over her handiwork with satisfaction. All right, supplies are organized. We've got food for maybe 2 days, some basic medical supplies, and whatever survival tools came with these bags. In the observation deck, Lortak observed this teamwork with mild surprise. They're actually coordinating. The corporate one has organized resources, the influencer has managed fire, and the medic is already setting up camp infrastructure. Brix stared, astonished. They're working together. And efficiently. I thought they'd be at each other's throats by now. Lortak rubbed his appendages together thoughtfully. Perhaps there's more resilience to this species than we anticipated. Keep observing. This could become interesting. As the humans settled around their modest camp, the alien observers watched, intrigued by how quickly the trio had adapted. The Inquisitive Drift's crew was beginning to wonder if their initial assessments of humanity's primitive status might have been a bit premature. They've shown surprising resilience so far, Lortak observed, rubbing his upper appendages thoughtfully. Let's see how they handle more pressing challenges. Brix nodded enthusiastically. Shall I initiate a weather shift, Chief? Perhaps a sudden temperature drop to test their ability to stay warm. Precisely, Lortak replied, a slight smirk tugging at his mandibles. And let's also reduce their food resources by half. I want to see if scarcity fractures their cohesion or brings out their baser instincts. Down in the forest, the temperature began to plummet, a chilly breeze sweeping through the trees as the humans huddled around their small fire. Helen shivered, clutching her arms around herself as she looked at Aaron, who was tending to the fire with a fierce determination. Did it just get colder? Aaron asked, his breath visible in the crisp air. This isn't normal, right? It was warm a minute ago. Jay gave a quick nod, unfazed. Seems like it. We need to keep this fire going or risk hypothermia. Aaron, I'll need you to gather more wood before it gets too cold to move. Aaron hesitated for only a second before nodding and grabbing his bag, a hint of pride showing in his determined expression. Got it, he said. I'll be back in no time. Helen, meanwhile, pulled the survival blanket from her bag and looked at it skeptically. She'd read the emergency manual included with the bag, which she normally would have found tedious, but now she was glad for the detailed instructions. All right, she said, mustering her best team leader voice, we've got some blankets here. If we can reinforce our shelter and insulate it, we should be able to retain some warmth. Jay smiled approvingly. Good thinking, Helen. Go ahead and do that while I keep an eye out. We'll need to stay on guard if conditions keep changing. Helen nodded, gathering the few blankets they had and draping them around the shelter, anchoring the edges with rocks and securing any gaps where cold air could seep through. Meanwhile, Jay set about fortifying their little camp area, using branches to fashion a makeshift barricade around the camp's perimeter. She moved with efficiency and purpose, not once questioning the strangeness of the sudden weather shift. Years of field experience had trained her to focus on survival without dwelling on factors she couldn't control. As she worked, Brix watched in astonishment from above, adjusting the controls to introduce a new element, faint growls emanating from hidden speakers around the simulation. They'll think it's a predator in the area, he murmured to Lortak. Surely that will unsettle them. Lortak leaned closer to the observation screen. Excellent. Let's see if a perceived threat causes them to splinter. Back on the ground, Aaron returned with an armful of wood just as the eerie sounds reached their ears. He dropped the wood by the fire, glancing nervously at Jay. Did you hear that? Jay nodded, her face calm but alert. It's probably an animal. We're in the wilderness, so we should expect wildlife. But we have the fire and a decent perimeter. As long as we stay aware, we'll be fine. Helen looked over at Aaron. Keep the fire strong. I'll ration our food, just in case we're here longer than expected. Let's work with what we have. Aaron nodded, settling near the fire with renewed focus. He arranged the wood carefully, feeding it in a steady rhythm to keep the flames high and warm. Each time the fire flickered, he added another log, determined to ensure that their heat source didn't falter. Lortak raised an eyebrow, observing Aaron's careful, rhythmic movements with interest. He's displaying significant improvement, he noted to Brix. It's as if the challenges are refining his skills, not hindering him. Brix frowned, perplexed. They're not just adapting individually, they're reinforcing each other. The corporate one, Helen, is keeping resources organized efficiently. The medic's protective instincts are kicking in, and even the so-called survival influencer is contributing meaningfully. As the cold settled deeper, Jay continued patrolling the perimeter, instinctively checking for weak points and marking areas they might need to fortify. She had fashioned a few rudimentary traps using the spare paracord in her bag, placing them strategically around the camp's edge. If any creature dared approach, they'd be met with a makeshift but effective barrier. Helen, meanwhile, had taken it upon herself to ration their remaining supplies, distributing small portions of food with precision. She glanced around at her companions and felt a surprising surge of responsibility. She was used to managing resources and keeping track of assets, but here, it wasn't just a job. It was essential for survival. "All right, I've allocated our remaining rations," she said, her voice firm. "We'll stretch what we have for at least another day, maybe 2 if we're careful." Aaron looked up from the fire, his face shadowed but determined. "This is teamwork." "Ha," he muttered with a small smile. "Guess I didn't realize it'd be this real." Up above, the alien observers watched, jaws slack with shock. Lord Tack crossed his upper appendages thoughtfully, eyes flickering over each human's activities. "They're not simply coping with the conditions," he murmured, almost to himself. "They're thriving. Our weather manipulation, simulated predators, and limited resources are doing little to destabilize them." Bricks shifted, uncomfortable. "This is not the typical response we observe in low-category civilizations, Chief. By now, most species would be fracturing, not strengthening." Lortak nodded, his expression unreadable. "Humans may be an exception. Their adaptability appears to be intertwined with social cooperation, an asset in hostile environments." As the cold night settled over the simulated forest, the humans huddled around their fire, exchanging small smiles and quiet conversation. Aaron added logs to the fire as Jay adjusted the barricades and Helen finished arranging their meager supplies. "They've surprised us," Bricks Lortak said quietly, glancing over at his assistant. "Tomorrow we'll add even more challenges, but somehow I suspect they'll only continue to impress." The following day, as dawn broke over the simulated forest, the humans awoke to even harsher conditions. A damp, chilly fog had settled in, reducing visibility and adding a heavy dampness to the already cold air. Jay, accustomed to assessing every situation with a survivalist's eye, noted the increased humidity and immediately started assessing water sources. The small stream they'd found earlier was still flowing but slow, and she could see traces of mud mixing in, making it less suitable for drinking without some form of filtration. Jay scanned her bug-out bag thoughtfully and pulled out a few items: a water bottle, some cloth, and the remaining purification tablets. Carefully, she fashioned a makeshift filter by layering cloth to trap sediment and then dropped a purification tablet in to disinfect the water. "This'll take a while," she noted to herself, setting up several containers with the filtered water trickling into each. Her face bore a calm, focused expression as she worked, conserving their resources one step at a time. Meanwhile, Aaron, feeling more confident after his success with the fire, looked around for tools they could use to reinforce the camp and gather food. He picked up a few stones and, after some trial and error, managed to fashion a crude but usable hand axe by striking 2 rocks together, creating a rough edge. This actually works," he muttered, admiring his handiwork. He moved to Helen, who was busy organizing their supplies, and held up his creation with a triumphant grin. "Look, instant axe. I think we could use this to gather more wood or even cut through thicker branches." Helen glanced up, impressed. "Nice work, Aaron. You're actually getting the hang of this survival thing." She returned to her project. She'd divided their supplies into neat piles and was using a stick to scratch a schedule and inventory list into the dirt. With sections labeled food, water, and tools, she felt a sense of control that was oddly comforting in this unpredictable environment. "All right," she announced, dusting her hands off. "Here's how we're structuring things for today. Aaron, you're in charge of gathering wood and finding anything we can use as tools. Jay, you're on water purification. I'll handle food distribution and keep track of what we use. Up in the observation deck, Brix was astonished, his mandibles twitching with confusion. Chief, they're working together with incredible efficiency. The corporate one, Helen, is actually coordinating their efforts. She's created some kind of project management system for resource allocation. Lortak leaned closer to the screen, watching as Helen made notes in the dirt, guiding her team with a level of precision he'd never seen from a primitive civilization before. She's creating structure out of scarcity, he said slowly, almost in disbelief. And the other two, did the influencer really fashion a tool from rocks? Brix zoomed in on Aaron, who was now using his makeshift axe to gather more substantial branches and even carve out small notches in the wood to create traps. Yes, Chief, he said, voice tinged with a strange mixture of awe and incredulity. He's making tools, actual tools that he's learning to use on the spot. The crew watched in silence as Aaron returned with an armful of wood and proudly demonstrated his new tool to Jay. I'm not saying it's perfect, he admitted, but it gets the job done. Jay nodded approvingly. Keep it up. This'll be a huge help, especially if we need to build anything more permanent. Back at the camp, Helen continued her inventory, even sketching out an improvised plan for the next 2 days. If we stick to a rationing schedule, we'll have enough for at least 3 days, assuming conditions don't worsen. We'll focus on wood, water, and shelter for now and look for more food sources if necessary. Her calm, organized approach brought a strange sense of peace to the group. Aaron, who was typically quick to feel anxious without his digital comforts, found himself surprisingly focused, motivated by the progress they were making together. Jay, seeing her companion step up, pushed her own efficiency even further, strengthening the perimeter and reinforcing traps to ensure their safety. In the observation deck, Lortak exchanged a glance with Brix. This is unprecedented, he murmured. They're not merely surviving the conditions we've set for them, they're thriving. Brix scratched his head, thoroughly puzzled. I don't understand. With every new obstacle we introduce, they seem to evolve, adapt, and become even more capable. It's as if each challenge only sharpens their skills. Lortak studied the humans, a mix of fascination and unease in his gaze. It's more than adaptation. Their collaboration is unique. They're using each other's strengths, and they seem to be enjoying it. In all my years, I've never seen this level of resilience in a civilization we classified as primitive. Below, the humans continued their work, oblivious to the alien eyes watching them. Aaron's confidence in his tools grew as he found more ways to refine them. Jay's water purification system was running smoothly, and Helen's management skills kept everyone organized and calm. They shared a laugh when Helen jokingly referred to the camp as Project Survival, and even Aaron, who'd initially complained, admitted he felt a strange satisfaction in the teamwork. As the sun began to dip, their camp transformed into something more than just a survival site. It was organized, resilient, and somehow, even a little bit comfortable. The humans sat by the fire sharing stories, and the inquisitive drift crew watched, mystified by the unexpected ingenuity and strength of their subjects. Perhaps Lortak said softly, we've underestimated them. There is more to these humans than their basic technology suggests. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the humans gathered around their fire, chatting quietly, the inquisitive drift crew prepared to unleash their final, ultimate test. Lortak leaned forward, his many eyes narrowing with anticipation. Initiate the flood simulation, he ordered, and release the predator projections. Let's see how they handle a multi-threat scenario. Brix input the commands with a slight shiver of excitement. Yes, Chief. Flash flood and predator simulation activated. Below, Helen, Jay, and Aaron were in the middle of discussing their plans for the next day when they noticed the stream nearby beginning to swell. Jay was the first to notice the sudden change in water flow, and her eyes widened. Look, she said, pointing. That stream's rising fast. We might have a flood situation on our hands. Helen immediately shifted into action mode. We need to create a barrier. If we can redirect the water flow, we'll have a better chance of keeping the fire and supplies safe. Aaron, alarmed but ready to help, nodded and grabbed their makeshift tools. He began collecting larger rocks and branches to build a barricade, and under Helen's direction, they positioned these along the low-lying side of the camp to redirect any rushing water. The three of them worked quickly and efficiently, piling rocks and stacking branches in a coordinated effort, while Jay continuously scanned the surroundings, ensuring they didn't miss any escape routes. Up above, Brix was watching in disbelief. They're responding as though they've trained for this. The corporate one is directing them with absolute authority, and the others are following without hesitation. Impressive lore, Tak murmured, barely containing his awe. Their capacity to organize under stress is remarkable. As the water continued to rise, the aliens triggered another element of the simulation, a series of growls and shadows moving at the edges of the camp, simulating predators creeping in. The sound was low, menacing, and grew steadily closer. Aaron's face went pale for a moment, but he quickly looked at his teammates. Okay, everyone, we need a way to scare off whatever's out there. Maybe some noisemakers. Jay grinned, impressed by his quick thinking. Exactly what I was about to suggest. Here, she said, pulling out some metal cooking items from her bag. If we hang these from branches and shake them, the noise should deter whatever's lurking. You handle that, Aaron? Nodding, Aaron got to work stringing up the makeshift noisemakers around the camp perimeter. He tapped them gently, sending a jangling sound into the air, and the noise reverberated through the dark trees. Soon he had the perimeter set up with rattling items, and with a few loud bangs and clangs, the sounds of the predators seemed to back off. Helen, meanwhile, assessed the effectiveness of their flood barrier and encouraged Jay to guide the group to higher ground. We should be safe if we move up to that ridge, Helen said, pointing to a slope nearby. But let's leave some of the supplies here. This way, if we're forced back, we'll still have access to what we need. Jay took the lead, guiding them to the ridge while Aaron and Helen gathered essential supplies to bring along. They scaled the slope carefully, positioning themselves where they could watch both the camp and the forest below. Jay instructed Aaron to keep shaking the noisemakers periodically, keeping whatever simulated predators were out there at bay. In the observation deck, Tak and Brix were utterly stunned. Tak's appendages twitched with disbelief. They're not only adapting to each element we've thrown at them, he said slowly, they're taking calculated risks and securing their resources with foresight. This level of coordination. It's more than we see in most advanced civilizations under duress. Brix, staring at the humans on the screen, barely nodded. They're not just surviving, they're thriving, he whispered, as if afraid to admit it aloud. Down below, the humans huddled together on the ridge, Aaron keeping a close eye on the fire, Helen studying their resources with a determined expression, and Jay checking their defenses. The flood simulation had worked well, but the humans had quickly found higher ground and maintained their camp's perimeter without faltering. As the simulated predators grew quieter and the floodwaters receded, the humans shared a collective sigh of relief. Helen grinned at her companions. Not bad for a makeshift team. Jay chuckled, looking over at Aaron. You've come a long way from worrying about your camera, haven't you? Aaron laughed, a little embarrassed but proud. Guess I needed a reality check. Turns out all those online videos didn't quite prepare me for the real deal. But hey, we made it. The aliens watched this camaraderie, Tak, with something almost like admiration. They have an instinct for adaptation that we didn't account for, he admitted, a grudging respect in his tone. I believe. We've underestimated them. This species may be more advanced in ways that don't align with our typical criteria. Brix nodded, awestruck. It's as if they're deceptively advanced, despite their reliance on basic tools and outdated technology. Tak glanced at him, then sighed. Prepare the final report, Brix. Mark them as deceptively advanced with a cautionary note: human adaptability exceeds standard projections. We may need a new classification entirely for them. Brix carefully made the necessary entries, attaching a recommendation for further observation of humans before dismissing them as primitive. It was a humbling realization for the aliens they'd witnessed a level of resourcefulness that defied their preconceptions. With the test complete, The Inquisitive Drift crew activated the memory modification protocol. Helen, Jay, and Aaron were seamlessly transported back to their original locations, each with a modified memory of a simple camping trip, unaware of the alien experiment they'd just endured. Back on Earth, each human resumed their life but found themselves changed in small, powerful ways. Helen launched a successful initiative at her company, applying her survival-inspired organization skills to streamline projects. Aaron's blog took a new turn, focusing on practical skills and real experiences which garnered a loyal following. Jay felt a renewed confidence in her survival abilities and began mentoring others in emergency preparedness. Meanwhile, back on the Inquisitive Drift, LoreTech added a new protocol to the alien database before dismissing any species as primitive, assessed for hidden adaptability. Humans, especially, may exhibit advanced survival strategies beyond technological appearances. The crew had learned a lesson they wouldn't soon forget about humanity's resilience, and they made a silent pact to approach future species with a far more open mind.